The heavy oak door slammed shut behind Laura, echoing like a gavel sentencing her to prison, not a workplace. The silence in the massive Hargreave manor was heavy, suffocating, and smelled of dust and secrets kept for too long. Laura's hands trembled as she clutched her purse, the only lifeline she had left. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked, a slow, deliberate sound that made the hair on her arms stand up. She had come here for the money, desperate to save her children. But as she looked at the shadowed portraits lining the hallway, she realized something terrifying. The eyes in the paintings weren't just watching her. They looked familiar. Too familiar. Laura didn't know it yet, but walking into this house wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of unearthing a grave her husband had spent his entire life trying to hide. Before we step into the biting cold of Montana and Laura's struggle, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We are on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep bringing you powerful, emotional stories like this one. Your support truly changes lives. Now let's begin. The wind in Ashford Ridge, Montana, didn't just blow, it bit. It chewed through the thin insulation of the small, decaying wooden house Laura Bennett called home, finding every crack in the window frames to whisper cold threats into her living room. Laura sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, surrounded by a fortress of white envelopes. Each one was a demand for money she didn't have: the electricity bill, the water bill, the final notice on the mortgage. They were like vultures circling a carcass, waiting for the final moment to strike. It had been 6 months since Michael died. The accident had been sudden, a patch of black ice, a skid, a tree. Just like that, the pillar of their world was gone. Michael had always been the strong one, the provider, the man with the warm laugh that could fill a room. Now the silence he left behind was deafening. It was a silence filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the anxious beating of Laura's own heart. She looked out the window where the grey afternoon light was fading over the mountains. In the yard, her children were playing in the snow, though playing was a generous word. Ryan, only 8 years old, wasn't building a snowman or making snow angels. He was stacking firewood near the porch, his small face set in a grim expression of determination that broke Laura's heart. He was trying so hard to be the man of the house, carrying a weight no second grader should ever have to bear. Oliver, 7, sat on the swing set, dragging his boots through the slush, his head down. He was the sensitive one, the one who felt the world too deeply. And little Sophie. 5-year-old Sophie was just standing near the door, waiting. She was always waiting. She still asked when Daddy was coming home, unable to grasp the permanence of the word gone. Laura wiped a tear before it could fall. Crying wouldn't pay the heating bill. Crying wouldn't put food in the fridge. She needed a miracle, and miracles were in short supply in Ashford Ridge. Her phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood. It was the employment agency. Laura snatched it up, her fingers gripping the plastic case so hard her knuckles turned white. "Mrs. Bennett?" The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and devoid of sympathy. "We have an opening. It's unconventional." "I'll take it," Laura said, her voice raspy. She hadn't even asked what it was. She couldn't afford to be picky. "It's a live-in companion position," the agent continued, sounding hesitant, "for Mrs. Dorothy Hargreave, up at the Ridge Estate." Laura froze. Everyone in town knew the name Hargreave, and everyone knew the stories. Dorothy Hargreave was the wealthiest woman in the county, a recluse who lived in a mansion that looked more like a mausoleum. The rumors said she was mean, bitter, and impossible to please. They said she chewed up caregivers and spat them out before lunchtime. There was a reason the position was open. Nobody lasted more than a week. "The pay?" The agent paused, naming a figure that made Laura gasp. It was triple what she could make anywhere else. It was enough to clear the mortgage arrears in 2 months. It was enough to buy groceries for a year. "But Mrs. Bennett, I must warn you, she has strict requirements and a difficult temperament." "I'll take it," Laura repeated, firmer this time. She looked out the window at Ryan struggling with a heavy log. She would walk into a lion's den if it meant keeping a roof over her children's heads. 2 days later, Laura was driving her rusted sedan up the winding, treacherous road that led to the Hargreave estate. The trees here were older, their twisted branches reaching over the road like skeletal fingers blocking out the sky. The higher she drove, the more isolated she felt. The town of Ashford Ridge shrank in her rearview mirror until it was just a smudge of grey against the white snow. The iron gates of the estate loomed ahead, rusted and imposing, topped with gargoyles that seemed to sneer at her arrival. Laura pressed the intercom button, stating her name. With a groan of metal on metal, the gates swung open slowly, granting her entry into a world that felt frozen in time. The mansion was enormous, a Gothic stone beast sitting atop the hill. Ivy, dead and brown from the winter, clung to the walls like veins. The windows were dark, like empty eye sockets staring blindly across the valley. Laura parked her car, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. "For the kids," she whispered to herself. "Just do it for the kids." The front door was opened not by a servant, but by a mechanism she couldn't see. She stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside was colder than outside. It smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and loneliness. "You're late." The voice came from the shadows of the drawing room to her left. It was sharp like the crack of a whip. Laura stepped forward, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. In a high-backed velvet armchair sat Dorothy Hargreave. She was a small woman, withered by age, but her eyes were piercingly blue and sharp as glass shards. She held a cane with a silver handle, her knuckles swollen with arthritis, but gripping the wood with surprising strength. "I apologize, Mrs. Hargreave," Laura said, keeping her head high. "The roads were icy." "Excuses are for the weak," the old woman snapped. She didn't offer a greeting. She didn't offer a seat. She simply stared at Laura, analyzing her like a bug under a microscope. "You know the salary. You know the hours. Now hear the rules. Because if you break one, you will be out on the street before your coat is buttoned." Laura nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Rule 1. No visitors. Ever," Dorothy recited, her voice monotone. "Rule 2. You do not touch anything that is not necessary for cleaning or my care, especially the artifacts in the library. Rule 3. No questions about my past, my family, or this house. You are here to work, not to gossip." "I understand," Laura said softly. "And finally," Dorothy leaned forward, her face coming into the light. The lines of bitterness were etched deep around her mouth. "You will never, under any circumstances, open the drawers in the mahogany desk in the study, is that clear?" "Crystal clear," Laura replied. Dorothy narrowed her eyes. "You have the look of a woman who is desperate. That is good. Desperate people work harder. What is your name again, girl?" "Laura," she replied. "Laura Bennett." At the sound of the surname, the cane in Dorothy's hand slipped. It clattered loudly against the floorboards, the sharp noise echoing through the empty room. For a second, the old woman's mask of anger slipped. Her face went pale, her eyes widening with an emotion Laura couldn't quite place. Was it fear, shock, recognition? Dorothy's breathing hitched, a ragged sound in the quiet room. Her gaze darted to Laura's face, searching for something, tracing her features with a frantic intensity. "Bennett," Dorothy whispered, the word sounding like a curse on her lips. "Did you say Bennett?" Laura stepped forward to help pick up the cane, but Dorothy recoiled, shrinking back into her chair as if Laura were a ghost. "Yes, ma'am," Laura said, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "My late husband was Michael Bennett." Dorothy squeezed her eyes shut, her chest heaving. She gripped the arms of her chair until her skin looked translucent. When she opened her eyes again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a cold, hard wall of suspicion. But beneath that anger, Laura saw a flicker of something else, something dangerous. "Get out of my sight," Dorothy hissed, pointing a trembling finger toward the kitchen. "Start dinner, and don't you dare come back in here until I call for you." Laura hurried toward the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't know what had just happened, but as she walked down the dark corridor, she couldn't shake the feeling that the name Bennett wasn't just a name in this house. It was a key. And she had just unlocked a door that should have stayed shut. The first week at the Hargreave estate felt less like a job and more like a sentence served in solitary confinement. The mansion was a labyrinth of cold drafts and silence, a place where time didn't just pass, it dragged its feet. Laura's days fell into a grueling rhythm, dictated by the sharp rhythmic tapping of Dorothy's cane against the hardwood floors. That sound became the soundtrack of Laura's anxiety. Tap, tap, tap. It meant a demand was coming. It meant a criticism was brewing. Dorothy Hargreave was not merely difficult. She was a fortress of solitude, built with bricks of resentment. She treated affection like a disease she was terrified of catching. When Laura tried to arrange fresh winter berries in a bowl to brighten the dining room, Dorothy swept them into the trash with a sweep of her hand, claiming the color was vulgar. When Laura offered a soft blanket for Dorothy's knees during the drafty evenings, the old woman recoiled, as if the wool were made of barbed wire. "I am not an invalid, Mrs. Bennet," Dorothy had snapped, her blue eyes icy. "And I do not pay you to smother me. I pay you to keep the dust off my furniture and the silence in my home." The rules Dorothy had recited on that first day were enforced with military precision. Laura was a ghost in the house, seen only when summoned, heard only when spoken to, but it was the silence regarding the past that was the most suffocating. The house was devoid of personal history. There were no smiling faces in silver frames on the mantelpiece, no albums on the coffee tables. The grand library, filled with thousands of books, had shelves that felt impersonal, as if purchased by the yard rather than collected over a lifetime. One afternoon, while dusting the heavy velvet drapes in the parlor, Laura's curiosity got the better of her. She noticed a heavy oak cabinet in the corner, the wood dark and polished to a mirror shine. Unlike the other furniture, this one had a brass lock that looked worn, as if a key had been turned in it thousands of times. Laura reached out, her cloth hovering over the intricate carvings. "Don't!" The voice came from behind her, low and dangerous. Laura spun around, nearly dropping her duster. Dorothy was standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on her cane, her face pale. She wasn't looking at Laura. She was staring at the cabinet with a mixture of longing and terror that made Laura's stomach turn. "I was just dusting, Ma'am," Laura stammered, stepping back. "That cabinet stays locked," Dorothy whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It contains nothing of concern to you. Old papers, taxes, dust." But Laura knew a lie when she heard one. Taxes didn't make a woman's hands shake. Dust didn't make a person's eyes fill with a sudden, unshed tear. Dorothy hobbled over, placing herself physically between Laura and the cabinet, acting as a human shield for whatever secrets lay inside. "Go check the post," Dorothy ordered, turning her back. "Leave this room." As the days turned into weeks, the strange tension surrounding Laura's last name didn't dissipate. It festered. Whenever Laura mentioned her children, a slip of the tongue about Ryan's grades or Sophie's drawings, Dorothy would stiffen. She wouldn't ask follow-up questions. She wouldn't offer a grandmotherly smile. Instead, she would stare out the window at the bleak, snowy landscape, her jaw set tight, her fingers drumming anxiously on the arm of her chair. It was as if the mere existence of Laura's family was a personal offense to her. Yet, Laura caught the old woman watching her. Sometimes, while Laura was scrubbing the floor or polishing silver, she would feel eyes on her. She would look up to find Dorothy observing her from across the room, studying her face with a hunger that was unsettling. It wasn't the look of an employer watching a servant. It was the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle they were afraid to finish. The nights were the hardest. The servants' quarters were located in a wing of the house that hadn't been renovated in decades. The wind howled through the eaves, sounding like distant screams. Laura missed Michael terribly in those hours. She missed the warmth of his back against hers, the safety of his presence. Here, she was alone in a house that felt alive with malice. One particularly stormy Tuesday night, the power flickered and died, plunging the mansion into absolute darkness. The silence of the house changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt heavy, pressurized. Laura lit a candle and made her way through the corridors to check on Dorothy. The old woman refused to have a generator installed, calling it a noisy modern nuisance, so the house was a tomb of shadows. As Laura approached the master bedroom, she heard a sound that froze her blood. It was a low, guttural moaning. Panic surged through her. Was Dorothy having a heart attack? Laura rushed forward, pushing the heavy mahogany door open. The room was illuminated only by the faint, ghostly light of the moon, breaking through the storm clouds outside. Dorothy was tossing and turning in her massive four-poster bed, tangled in the silk sheets. She wasn't awake. She was trapped in the throes of a nightmare. "No," Dorothy whimpered, her voice sounding like a child's, stripped of all its daytime armor. "Don't take him. Please." Laura stepped closer, the candlelight flickering across the old woman's sweat-drenched face. She reached out a hand to wake her, to shake her from the terror, but stopped when Dorothy spoke again. This time the word was clear. It cut through the darkness like a knife. "Michael!" Laura's breath hitched. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael. It was a common name. Of course it was a common name. There must be thousands of Michaels in Montana alone. But the way Dorothy said it, with such agonizing, gut-wrenching grief, sounded exactly like the way Laura said it into her pillow every night. It wasn't just a name, it was a plea. "Michael, come back," Dorothy sobbed in her sleep, her hands clutching the empty air. "My boy, my sweet boy, I didn't mean it." Laura stood paralyzed in the center of the room, the candle wax dripping hot onto her fingers, but she didn't feel the burn. Her mind was racing. My boy. Dorothy had no children. The town gossip was clear on that. Dorothy Hargreave was a spinster, a barren woman who had let her family line die out with her. That was why she was so bitter. That was why she was alone. But the woman in the bed wasn't a spinster. She was a mother in mourning. Laura watched as Dorothy thrashed again, a single tear escaping her closed eyelid and rolling into her silver hair. "Forgive me, Michael." The air in the room felt suddenly too thin to breathe. Laura slowly backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She retreated into the hallway, pulling the door shut with a soft click. She leaned against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor, the candle trembling in her hand. Why would this rich, cruel stranger be dreaming of a Michael? And why did the pain in her voice sound so terrifyingly familiar? Laura looked down the long, dark hallway. The portraits on the walls were nothing but shadows now, but she felt their eyes on her. She had come here to clean a house, but as the storm raged outside, Laura realized she had walked into a mausoleum of secrets. And the ghost haunting these halls wasn't dead. She was sleeping in the master bedroom. Laura blew out the candle, plunging herself into darkness. She needed to know the truth. Because if Dorothy Hargreave had a son named Michael, then who was the man Laura had married? The mystery is deepening, and Laura is standing on the edge of a revelation that could change everything. If you are hooked on this story and want to know what happens next, please hit that subscribe button. We need your help to reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and every single click brings us closer to sharing more incredible stories like this one. Don't miss out. Subscribe now. The morning after the storm, the atmosphere in the Hargreave Manor had shifted. The air felt brittle, as if one wrong move would shatter the fragile peace. Dorothy sat at the breakfast table, her posture rigid, attacking her grapefruit with a silver spoon. She looked exhausted, the skin beneath her eyes bruised with purple shadows, a testament to the night terrors Laura had witnessed. Laura poured coffee with a steady hand, though her mind was anything but calm. The name Michael echoed in her head, bouncing around her thoughts like a ricocheting bullet. She placed the cup down, the china clinking softly against the saucer. "You look tired, Mrs. Hargreave," Laura ventured cautiously, stepping back to her designated spot by the sideboard. Dorothy's spoon paused. "I slept poorly." "The storm," she said dismissively, not looking up. "The wind in this valley sounds like wailing banshees." "You were speaking in your sleep," Laura said. It was a risk, a massive one. Dorothy's head snapped up. The spoon clattered into the bowl. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "What did I say?" "Just murmurs," Laura lied smoothly, her heart thumping. "You seemed distressed. You mentioned a name. Michael." The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, Laura thought she might be fired on the spot. Dorothy's face went blank, her expression locking down like a vault door slamming shut. She picked up her napkin and dabbed her mouth with trembling precision. "I knew a Michael once," Dorothy said, her voice devoid of emotion, though her eyes were fixed on a point far away. A gardener. He stole silver from the pantry years ago. A thief, that is all. A lie, Laura thought. A gardener didn't make a woman weep in her sleep. A thief didn't make a woman beg for forgiveness. Over the next few weeks, a strange dynamic began to form. As Dorothy's physical strength waned with the harsh winter, her emotional walls began to show cracks. She started asking Laura small things. How old is your eldest? Does the little girl like dolls? She would listen to the answers with a hungry intensity, then abruptly change the subject, as if she had indulged in something forbidden. One Tuesday, Dorothy fell ill. A fever kept her confined to her bed, leaving Laura with free rein of the downstairs for the first time. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Laura decided to deep clean the study, the one room she usually avoided due to Dorothy's hawk-like supervision. She polished the heavy mahogany desk, the smell of lemon wax filling the air. As she wiped down the legs of the desk, her cloth caught on something underneath. It was a latch, a hidden catch under the lip of the desk drawer. Laura's breath hitched. Dorothy had explicitly forbidden her from opening the drawers. Rule number 4. But the memory of Dorothy's nightmare, the name Michael, and the inexplicable tension when she heard Bennett pushed Laura's hand. With a trembling finger, she pressed the latch. Click. The bottom drawer, which had always been locked, popped open an inch. Laura froze, listening for the tap-tap-tap of the cane upstairs. Silence. She pulled the drawer open. It wasn't filled with tax papers. It wasn't filled with dust. It was filled with a life. There were stacks of letters bundled in faded blue ribbon. There were small trinkets, a toy soldier, a silver rattle, a lock of blonde hair in a glass vial, and at the very bottom, a wooden box made of dark walnut. Laura lifted the box out, her hands shaking. She opened it. Inside lay a birth certificate yellowed with age. Laura unfolded it, her eyes scanning the elegant cursive script. Certificate of live birth. Date: October 14th, 1982. Mother: Dorothy Eleanor Hargreave. Father: unknown. Child's name: Michael Edward Hargreave. Laura gasped, the paper fluttering from her fingers to the floor. Michael. Her Michael's birthday was October 14th, 1982. She grabbed the stack of photos beneath the certificate. The first was a black and white picture of a young woman, beautiful, proud, unmistakably Dorothy, holding a baby. The baby had wide, curious eyes and a small dimple in his left cheek. Laura felt the room spin. She knew that dimple. She had kissed that dimple every morning for 10 years. She saw that dimple on her son, Ryan, every time he tried to smile. She flipped to the next photo. A toddler Michael on a pony. A 5-year-old Michael standing in front of this house, this mansion, looking solemn in a tiny suit. And then a letter. It was unfinished, the handwriting jagged and angry. Mother, I cannot do it anymore. I cannot be the puppet you want me to be. You care more about the Hargreave name than you do about your own son. I am leaving. I am changing my name. Do not look for me. As far as you are concerned, Michael Hargreave is dead. I will find a life where love is not a transaction. It was signed simply, M. Laura sank into the leather office chair, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. Michael Bennett wasn't just Michael Bennett. He was Michael Hargreave, the heir to this fortune, the son of the woman sleeping upstairs. Everything suddenly made sense. Michael's refusal to talk about his family, his insistence that he was an orphan, the way he would get quiet and moody whenever they drove past large gated estates. He had been running from this, from Hurry. He had changed his name to Bennett, a common name, a name you could disappear into. He had built a life of simplicity and love, the exact opposite of the cold, rigid world of the Hargreaves. And now fate, or perhaps a cruel joke of the universe, had brought his widow back to the very place he had escaped. Laura looked down at the photo of the young boy. He looked so lonely, so burdened, just like Ryan looked now. Tears blurred her vision. She wasn't just the maid. She was the daughter-in-law, her children. Ryan, Oliver, Sophie. They were the grandchildren of this bitter, lonely woman. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Laura scrambled, shoving the photos and the birth certificate back into the box. She slammed the drawer shut just as the door to the study swung open. Dorothy stood there, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, looking frail and ghostly. She squinted at Laura, her gaze drifting from Laura's pale face to the desk. "What are you doing in here?" Dorothy rasped, her voice weak but suspicious. I was just polishing the desk, ma'am," Laura stammered, picking up her cloth and wiping a spot that was already gleaming. "I thought you were asleep." Dorothy stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then her eyes drifted to the drawer. The latch wasn't quite fully engaged. A tiny sliver of the blue ribbon was peeking out. Dorothy's face went grey. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She simply swayed, clutching the doorframe for support. "Get out," she whispered. "Mrs. Hargreave, Get out!" Dorothy screamed, a sound of pure, raw agony that tore through her throat. "Get out before I kill you!" Laura ran. She ran past the old woman, into the hallway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't stop until she reached the kitchen, collapsing against the counter. She had the truth now. But the truth hadn't set her free. It had trapped her in a cage with a wounded animal, and she had no idea how to escape without getting torn apart. The house was a ticking bomb. For 2 days after the incident in the study, Dorothy did not speak. She sat by the window in the drawing room, staring out at the relentless grey sky, wrapped in a silence so dense it felt physical. She refused to eat. She refused her medication. She simply sat, a statue carved from regret and stone. Laura moved around her like a shadow, performing her duties with mechanical precision, but her mind was a tempest. She looked at Dorothy, and no longer saw just a cruel employer. She saw the architect of her husband's pain. She saw the woman who had made Michael feel so unloved that he had to flee to find himself. Anger bubbled in Laura's chest, hot and sharp. But beneath the anger was pity. Michael was gone. Dorothy was the only link left to the boy he had once been. On the third evening, the silence broke. Laura brought a tray of tea and toast into the drawing room. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. "Take it away," Dorothy said, her voice brittle. "I am not hungry." "You have to eat," Laura said, her voice firmer than usual. She set the tray down with a clatter. "Starving yourself won't change the past, Dorothy." It was the first time she had used the woman's first name. Dorothy turned slowly, her eyes wide with shock. "How dare you—" "I know who he was," Laura interrupted, her voice trembling but clear. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was Michael's wife. "I saw the papers. I saw the photo. Michael was your son." Dorothy flinched as if struck. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white. "You have no right," she hissed. "You are a stranger, a servant. You know nothing of my family." "I know he left," Laura countered, stepping closer. "I know he changed his name because he couldn't bear to be a Hargreave anymore. I know he ran away from this house, from this money, from you." "He was ungrateful," Dorothy shouted, the facade finally cracking. Tears welled in her eyes, angry and hot. "I gave him everything. The best schools, the best clothes, a future most people would kill for, and he threw it in my face. He wanted to be a mechanic. He wanted to work with his hands like a common labourer. I told him no. I told him he was a Hargreave. He wanted to be happy," Laura said softly, "and you told him he couldn't be." Dorothy let out a ragged sob, her body slumping. "I did it for him, to protect him, to make him strong. The world is cruel, girl. You have to be hard to survive it. I tried to make him hard." "You made him leave," Laura said, "and he never came back." "He would have come back," Dorothy cried, her voice cracking into a high, desperate wail. "He was stubborn, just like his father. But he would have come back eventually, when he needed money, when he realized the world doesn't care about dreamers. I've been waiting every day for the phone to ring, for him to walk through that door." Laura felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. She looked at the old woman, broken, waiting for a ghost. Dorothy didn't know. All these years of silence, all these years of Michael hiding. She didn't know the final chapter. "Dorothy," Laura whispered, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a profound sadness. "He's not coming back." Dorothy looked up, her face streaked with tears. "He will. He has to. He can't." Laura took a step forward, kneeling beside the chair. She reached out and for the first time took Dorothy's cold, withered hand in hers. "Michael died 6 months ago." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Dorothy stared at her, uncomprehending. She blinked, once, twice. "No," she whispered. That's not true. He's in the city or traveling." "It was a car accident," Laura said, tears streaming down her own face now. "On the Ridge Road. It was quick. He didn't suffer." Dorothy pulled her hand away as if burned. She shook her head violently. "No, you're lying. You're a liar. My son is alive. He's out there." "He's gone, Dorothy," Laura said, her voice breaking. "My husband is gone." The word hung in the air. Husband. Dorothy stopped shaking. She looked at Laura with a terrifying clarity. Her eyes searched Laura's face, really seeing her for the first time. She saw the grief etched around Laura's mouth. She saw the honesty in her eyes. And slowly, agonizingly, the truth sank in. "Your husband?" Dorothy whispered. "Yes." Laura nodded. "We were married for 10 years. We have 3 children, Ryan, Oliver, and Sophie." Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a scream. Her chest heaved, gasping for air as if the room had suddenly been vacuumed of oxygen. The realization hit her in waves, crashing, destructive waves. Her son was dead. He had died hating her. He had died hiding from her. And the woman she had been treating like a servant, the woman she had belittled and ignored, was the woman her son had chosen, the woman who had given him the love Dorothy had withheld. "My grandchildren," Dorothy choked out, her voice barely audible. "They are mine." "Yes," Laura said. "They have his eyes, they have his laugh." Dorothy let out a sound that wasn't human, a keen of pure, unadulterated despair. She collapsed forward, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with violent sobs. It was the sound of a heart breaking decades too late. It was the sound of an empire of pride crumbling into dust. Laura didn't leave. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply sat on the floor beside the chair, witnessing the destruction of a woman who had realized too late that her wealth had bought her nothing but solitude. "I didn't know." Dorothy sobbed into her hands. "I didn't know." "He didn't want you to know," Laura said gently. "He wanted to protect us from you." Dorothy looked up, her face a ruin of mascara and tears. Am I that much of a monster?" Laura looked at her, really looked at her. She saw the fear, the loneliness, the regret. "You were a mother who made mistakes," Laura said, "terrible mistakes, but you're still here, and they are still here." Dorothy looked at Laura with a glimmer of desperate hope. Will you let me see them, or do you hate me too much?" Laura thought of Michael. She thought of his kindness, his ability to forgive. She thought of the bills piling up on her table, the cold house, the struggle. And she thought of Ryan, Oliver, and Sophie, who had lost a father, but perhaps could gain something else. "I don't hate you, Dorothy," Laura said, standing up and wiping her knees. "I pity you." "But Michael would have wanted his children to know their grandmother, if she can be a grandmother and not a dictator." Dorothy nodded frantically, wiping her face with her sleeve, abandoning all dignity. "I will try. I swear, I will try." The storm outside had passed, leaving a heavy silence over the mountain. But inside the house the ice was finally beginning to melt. The following Saturday, the old iron gates of the Hargreave estate groaned open, admitting a rusted sedan that looked painfully out of place against the manicured driveway. Laura gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. In the rearview mirror, she saw 3 anxious faces. "Is she a witch?" Oliver whispered, clutching his seatbelt. "Billy at school says she eats kids." She's not a witch, Ollie, Laura said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. She's your grandmother. She's sad and old. Be polite. Ryan sat with his arms crossed, staring out the window with Michael's brooding intensity. He was the hardest sell. He remembered his father's reluctance to talk about family. He sensed the betrayal in the silence. Sophie, on the other hand, was humming, clutching a drawing she had made, a stick-figure family with a giant, wobbly son. When they entered the grand foyer, Dorothy was waiting. She wasn't sitting in her usual throne-like chair. She was standing, leaning heavily on her cane, wearing a dress that looked less severe than her usual black. Her hair was softer, less pulled back, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. The children huddled behind Laura's legs, intimidated by the sheer scale of the house and the stern-looking woman staring at them. "Hello," Dorothy said, her voice cracking. It was the softest Laura had ever heard her speak. "Hi," Sophie piped up, peeking out. "Are you the grandma?" Dorothy flinched, tears instantly springing to her eyes. She looked at the little girl, Michael's face in miniature. "Yes," she whispered. "I suppose I am." "I made you this," Sophie said, stepping forward and thrusting the drawing at her. Dorothy took the paper as if it were a delicate artifact worth millions. She stared at the crude crayon lines, her lips trembling. "It's beautiful. Thank you, child." Then she looked at the boys. Oliver gave a shy wave. But Ryan just stared, his young face hard. "You're the reason Dad never came here," Ryan said accusingly. The air in the room froze. Laura started to intervene. "Ryan, that's enough." "No," Dorothy interrupted, holding up a hand. She looked at the 8-year-old boy, seeing the ghost of her son in his defiance. "Let him speak. He has the right." She slowly lowered herself onto a bench near the door, bringing herself down to Ryan's eye level. "You are right, Ryan. I was hard on your father. I made mistakes, terrible ones. I thought I knew what was best for him, but I only drove him away. I am the reason you didn't know me." Ryan didn't blink. "He was a good dad." "I know," Dorothy said, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the powder on her cheek. I wish I had seen that. I wish I could tell him that." She took a ragged breath. "I cannot fix the past. I cannot bring him back. But I would like, if you will let me, to help you now, to know the boy he raised." Ryan hesitated, the anger in his eyes battling with a child's need for connection. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed. "Okay," he muttered. "Maybe." For the next hour, the impossible happened. The mausoleum came to life. Sophie ran down the halls where silence had reigned for decades, her laughter bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. Oliver asked questions about the suits of armor, and for the first time, Dorothy answered them with patience, not irritation. But the true turning point came in the library. Dorothy led them to the locked cabinet, the one Laura had been forbidden to touch. With a key from around her neck, she opened it. It wasn't just papers. It was a shrine to a lost childhood. She pulled out a dusty model airplane. "Your father built this," she told Ryan, handing it to him, "when he was your age. He loved to fly." Ryan took the plane, his eyes widening. He ran his fingers over the wood, connecting with a piece of his father he had never known existed. Later, while the children were eating cookies in the kitchen, baked by a bewildered but cooperative cook, Dorothy pulled Laura into the study. "I have done something," Dorothy said, her voice businesslike again, though her eyes were red-rimmed. She pulled a thick envelope from the desk drawer. "What is this?" Laura asked. "It is a new will," Dorothy said, "and a transfer of funds. I am setting up trust funds for the children. Their education, their future, it is all secured. They will never worry about money again. And for you." She slid a check across the desk. The amount made Laura dizzy. It was enough to pay off the house 5 times over. "I cannot take this," Laura said, pushing it back. "I didn't bring them here for money." "I know," Dorothy said fiercely. "That is why you deserve it. You loved my son when he had nothing. You loved him for him. I loved him for his name, for his legacy. You were the better mother, you were the better wife. She pressed the check back into Laura's hand, closing her cold fingers over Laura's warm ones. "Please," Dorothy whispered, "let me do this. It is the only way I know how to apologize. Money is cold comfort, I know, but it is protection. It is what Michael would have wanted, for you to be safe." Laura looked at the check, then at the woman. She saw the desperation. This wasn't charity, it was penance. "Thank you," Laura said softly. "There is one more thing," Dorothy said, her expression darkening with a new resolve. "I have not been entirely honest about the estate." "What do you mean?" "There was a clause in my husband's will, my late husband. He left a significant portion to Michael, to be released when he turned 30. I hid it. I withheld it, because I wanted him to come back and beg for it. I wanted control." She looked down, ashamed. "It is legally his, and now it is legally yours." Laura stared at her. The injustice of it burned. Michael had struggled. He had worked double shifts. He had worried about bills until the day he died. And all along, this fortune had been sitting here, held hostage by his mother's pride. "He didn't need it," Laura said, her voice tight. "He was rich in ways you never understood, Dorothy." Dorothy flinched, taking the blow. "I know. God help me. I know now." Laura took a deep breath. She could hold on to the anger. She had every right to. But then she looked out the window and saw Sophie chasing a butterfly in the snow-dusted garden, her bright coat a spot of color in the grey world. Hate was heavy. Forgiveness was lighter. "We will take it," Laura said. "For them." Dorothy nodded, looking smaller than ever. "Thank you." It wasn't a perfect ending. The scars were deep. But as Laura drove away that evening, looking back at the mansion, she saw a figure standing in the window, watching them go. The house didn't look quite so terrifying anymore. It just looked lonely. And for the first time in months, Laura didn't feel the crushing weight of the future on her chest. She felt something else. Hope. This is the end of Laura and Dorothy's journey, but it's just the beginning of the stories we want to share with you. If this emotional tale touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Help us hit 1,000 subscribers so we can continue creating content that matters. Thank you for watching. 6 months later, spring had finally come to Ashford Ridge. The snow that had choked the valley melted into rushing creeks, and the mountains turned a vibrant, impossible green. The transformation wasn't limited to the landscape. The Bennett house, once drafty and decaying, was now warm and secure. The roof had been fixed, the windows replaced. There were no ominous envelopes on the kitchen table anymore, only drawings by Sophie and school permission slips. But the biggest change wasn't the house, it was the Sunday routine. Every Sunday, the Bennetts drove up the winding road to the Hargreave estate. It was no longer a place of shadows. The heavy velvet drapes had been pulled back, letting sunlight flood the dusty rooms. The silence had been broken by the chaos of children. Dorothy was fading. Her health had declined rapidly after the confession, as if the secret had been the only thing holding her together. She spent most of her days in a wheelchair now, sitting on the terrace, wrapped in blankets. But her eyes were different. The hardness was gone, replaced by a soft, watery gratitude. On this particular Sunday, the air smelled of blooming lilac. Laura sat beside Dorothy on the terrace while the children played on the vast lawn. Ryan was flying the model airplane his father had built, his laughter ringing out clear and bright. "He looks so much like him," Dorothy murmured, her voice weak. "Seeing him run, it is like watching a memory come to life." "He has his spirit too," Laura said, pouring tea. "Stubborn." Dorothy chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Good. He will need it." She turned to Laura, her hand trembling as she reached into her lap. She pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. "Laura, I want you to have this." "What is it?" Laura asked. "Another check? Dorothy, you've done enough." "No, not money," Dorothy said. "This is for later, when I am gone. It is a letter for the children, and for you." Laura took the envelope. It felt heavy. "I have written down everything," Dorothy said, looking out at the mountains. Who Michael was before he left. The stories I never told him. The love I was too proud to show. I want them to know that their father didn't come from nothing. He came from a long line of flawed, complicated people. But he was the best of us. She looked at Laura, her eyes intense. And I wrote to you, asking you to tell them the truth, not just the happy parts, but the mistakes. Tell them that pride is a poison. Tell them that family is not about blood or money. It is about showing up. You taught me that. Laura felt a lump in her throat. She squeezed Dorothy's hand. I will. Dorothy leaned back, closing her eyes. A peaceful expression settled over her face, smoothing out the lines of bitterness that had defined her for so long. I am tired, Laura, but I am not afraid anymore. 2 weeks later, Dorothy Hargreave passed away in her sleep. The funeral was small, private, just as she had requested. As they stood by the grave next to the empty plot, where a memorial stone for Michael had been placed, Laura felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The cycle of pain had been broken. That evening, back at the manor, which now belonged to Ryan, Oliver, and Sophie, Laura gathered the children in the living room. She lit the fire, the warmth chasing away the evening chill. "Mom?" Ryan asked, sitting on the rug. "Is Grandma with Dad now?" "I think so," Laura said softly. "I think they have a lot to talk about." She opened the cream envelope. Inside was a photograph, one Laura had never seen. It was candid, blurry. A young Dorothy laughing, holding a toddler Michael up to the sky. They both looked radiant, untouched by the darkness that would come later. Laura showed it to the children. "Look," she said, her voice steady. "This is your father, and this is your grandmother. They loved each other once, and in the end they found their way back to each other through you." She read them the letter. It was a confession, a history lesson, and a love letter all in one. It stripped away the mystery of the Hargreave monster and revealed a woman who had simply been human, flawed and deeply lonely. As she finished reading, silence filled the room, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the past. It was a peaceful silence, the silence of a story that has finally been told in full. Laura looked at the photo again. No more secrets, no more lies. Michael was no longer a hidden shame. He was Michael Hargreave Bennett, a man who had chosen love over money and whose legacy was sitting right here on this rug. Laura stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting over Ashford Ridge, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The future was wide open. It wouldn't be easy. Raising 3 kids alone never was. But for the first time since the accident, Laura knew they were going to be okay. They had the truth. They had each other. And they had a home.